Is Joshua Metellus going to hold in for training camp? If he does, he kind of holds all the cards. Let me explain on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate you all so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. Today on the show, we got a jam-packed show for you. The Minnesota Vikings have their first training camp practice tomorrow. I misspoke yesterday. I said they didn't start till Saturday. That's just open to the fans Saturday is when things start. So that's when I think we start kind of getting a lot of the flood of information as people are posting videos they're not supposed to post, but fans are there and everybody can kind of see everything. But for now, we are beholden to whatever the media is going to put out and whatever the Vikings themselves are going to put out, which will be a little bit more restricted and controlled. But they're going to start practicing. We're here. We made it. It's camp. It's happening. And that means that everybody has reported perfect attendance. Everybody is there as they are supposed to be. We have some injury updates. It looks as though the offensive line is inching closer and closer to what seemed to be the pipe dream of a week one together O-line, the all five starters actually making it together by week one, which didn't seem possible, but it seems like that's getting there. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Kevin O'Connell kind of alluded to a couple things that were very, very optimistic there. And also getting around to something that I wanted to get to last week, but obviously was out of town. The NFL Top 100 by Locked On. The Locked On as a network, we all submitted players for our own teams and then voted on that. And we have a top 100. And boy, Vikings aren't represented nearly enough in it. And I'm going to complain a little about that. But first things first, I think maybe the headline situation in camp when practice starts, and this is something to watch for immediately, I'm sure the media is going to be all over it, is going to be whether or not Joshua Metellus is practicing. He was held out entirely in OTAs. He didn't play at all. They had no obligation to disclose if there was an injury or not, so we can't know if he was hurt or if it was, contractitis. But either way, he hasn't played. He's not going on PUP or anything like that, and the Vikings, what I will say is, as dishonest as everybody always is on the podium in these things, they have been fairly forthright about injuries. And so I feel like Kevin O'Connell would have mentioned it. He would have said, hey, Joshua Metellus is out because he's injured, not let there be like contract confusion if that was truly not the thing. So it is a contract thing. I think we can be pretty sure of that. And it makes sense. He's criminally underpaid. He's in the last year of his deal. He wants a new contract, and that's what's going to happen. Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell did a joint press conference on Tuesday. They were asked about this situation. Kwesi said, we're in contact with his agent. We're having good dialogue. We're working on it, basically. We're having good dialogue means, yeah, it's going to get done, but it ain't going to get done in a hurry. So in the meantime, what does Joshua Metellus do? The hold in is the fashionable move nowadays. You show up, you're there with your teammates. You're not going to miss out on a whole bunch of practice, make a big stink about it, right? Unless you're Trey Hendrickson and you're really mad and he's going to go to Florida. No, you're going to be there. You're going to help your teammates. You're going to help, talk to the youngins and stuff like that, but you're not going to do anything physical and risk yourself getting hurt. That's really the thing, because if Joshua Metellus goes out for practice and he tears his ACL on cutting wrong, it could cost him millions and millions of dollars. How about let's get the millions and millions of dollars squared away, and then I'll go start taking the risks for you. That is the way that this is going to work. Doesn't seem like it's a contentious situation. I think the hold in is just a more amicable thing than the hold out anyways. You're in the building. You're playing ball. You're there in good. It's like an act of good faith. So we'll see what happens. But I think about what this team looks like without Joshua Metellus. And one of the other things that Kwesi talked about in the in the press conference. It was in relation to Jordan Addison, which we didn't get any new information. He just said, yeah, the NFL is like, talk to us, but they don't know yet. They're doing their process. So we don't know anything about a suspension yet, but they kind of asked about like, hey, how do you like prepare for that? You know, do you know if you don't know how many games you're going to miss for him, how do you prepare for it? I think they were hoping for some answer about like Jalen Naylor or something like that, but he's kind of, hey, that's kind of general team building. You want a team that's versatile, that can handle a whole bunch of different things. You want a team that can still win if this player is out or that player is out. You want a team that can win against a run first team or a pass first team. And then he actually, I think this was my favorite thing that he said in this whole press conference was just amusing about like single elimination playoffs as well. Because it's really ultimately, the thing we need to care about, right? That has been the wall the Vikings have rammed their heads up against all but once a decade since the 70s, is actually finding a way to win, string together multiple wins in the playoffs. It's a thing that hasn't happened for them since 1987. And trying to solve that problem means you have to contend with a single elimination world, which means there is no room to get caught out by a team that's like just the wrong matchup. Right? Oh, they were just, a bad matchup for the Vikings. Like, you can't have that because then you're out. You can be a good matchup for, 5 out of the other 6 teams in the playoffs. But if you catch the wrong one and you lose, it doesn't matter how good you were against all the rest of them. Right? So you need to kind of have versatility and answers. And so that feeds into the versatility that the Vikings have built, especially on defense with, guys like Joshua Metellus or Van Ginkel. Dallas Turner is another big part of this. And even on offense, the versatility of somebody like TJ Hawkinson or Rondale Moore, who actually might really be coming online here if he's not on PUP. I'm going to talk about that a little later. But the importance of Joshua Metellus feeds into not only like his role on the defense and the things that he does and the idea of if he is not here, who is doing those roles, how are we replacing him? But it also feeds into like the core pillar of the GM's philosophy on team building is rooted in versatility and the way that versatility can help you up your odds of winning in a single elimination playoff format is really, really important. And so without that, it's hard to see them. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out, hey, someone else has to play nickel. Okay, we'll bump Byron Murphy in and Jeff Okudah gets more snaps. Or, hey, we need another guy to play some more linebacker snaps. We'll figure it out. Like, that is less difficult to figure out than the idea of, okay, how do we continue to have versatility without him? That is an almost impossible question to answer, which is why Joshua Metellus, to me, is like a core and foundational pillar of the Vikings. And that is why he kind of has the Vikings over a barrel. They got to pay this dude. And I think they've made it very clear how much they love Joshua Metellus. I don't think that they're trying not to pay him or anything like that. They're just going through the process of negotiating a contract that doesn't happen overnight. But like, when it comes to the actual environment that you are negotiating in, Joshua Metellus is standing on quite the pedestal. Just the way the organization feels about him, the role he plays in the defense, the importance he has to the defense, the philosophy, the organization as a whole, the locker room, and everything, they are going to have to pay this dude. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. It's great when you have players that are on your team that are good enough to be worth paying. If you look at the teams that have all the cap space right now, they're the teams without any good players on them. Nobody's getting paid because everybody sucks. You don't want that, right? And I think the challenge is going to be kind of routing this contract around 2026 and the big cap crunch of 2026, but then into 27 and 28 where the cap crunches are like nothing, where they have like very, very, very little committed. And so kind of deciding where you're going to allocate money of that is going to be the Rob Brzezinski question, but it's also just about negotiating guarantees and kind of deciding how you value Joshua Metellus, who is not safety 3 anymore, right? Even if he is the safety that gets the third most reps, because Theo Jackson just takes the Cam Bynum role straight up, which has been kind of hinted at, even though it would be really surprising to me. He is still a foundational piece to the defense. What do you pay a foundational and positionless piece to the defense? There's not a lot of precedent. You can't just say, oh, I'll give him the Kyle Duggar contract. Like, I don't know what to do with that. But we'll see. If and when the contract does come down, we'll go to the history and we'll do the thing we normally do where we explain what everything is. But right now, Metellus's leverage on the Vikings is really high. That's not a bad thing, but it is going to make him more expensive, as he deserves to be. There is we got actually a lot of pretty good news out of this press conference, though, in the injury realm. And I do want to mention the NFL Top 100 Locked On project. So that'll all be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever looked at your bank account and then felt the wind get knocked out of you like a Vikings kick sailing wide? Do you ever wish it was maybe a little easier to manage your money? Monarch Money can help you out with that, from budgeting and pointing out areas where like you can figure out where you're cutting back, kind of tracking your spending and getting your most embarrassing spending habits laid bare so you know exactly what you can do to be more responsible, to like actually building wealth, managing your investments, and even joint accounts if you're somebody who manages an account with your partner, that now you can all like stay on the same page and have an actual clear plan together, communicate everything, and have no more confusion down the road. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money, the all-in-one financial command center. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rugiet. You've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried medications like that. But if you're looking for something a little more, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. It's a next-gen prescription treatment that's designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow, which means that it can kick in fast. It's a 3-in-1 formula, dissolves under the tongue, kicks in like 15 minutes on average, and the effects can last up to 36 hours. So no matter when the moment is right, you can be prepared. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch, and it's completely online. That means that it's going to be delivered discreetly to your door, and you can do the entire thing from the comfort of your own chair. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, some other things that came from the Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi press conference pre-camp, and as everybody's reporting, this is where we learn exactly who is able to play and who is unable to play. So yesterday, we discussed the Monday PUP decisions that came for Gavin Bartholomew, who was clarified as dealing with a lower back injury, which, yeah, that guy will linger. I don't know if we can even expect him to be ready for like cut down day, right? So I've been kind of leaving him to the side in my like 53-man roster projection kind of stuff. And I feel like that is going to continue to be appropriate. Also, Chaz Chambliss is on PUP, and we'll see if he's going to be able to participate right away. But it's more about who's not on PUP that is super, super interesting. We talked a little bit about Christian Darrisaw not being on PUP. O'Connell was asked about this, and what he had to say was pretty encouraging. Kevin O'Connell said that, like, from day one, Christian Darrisaw will be participating in individual drills. That means limited participant in training camp. If you're a limited participant day one, the way the Vikings tend to operate with these injuries, they do not take any risk. No team will take any risk at all this early in camp. If there is any concern at all that we're like rushing this or we're going too hard, they would rather you sit out all of camp in the preseason and make sure you're absolutely healthy. So if they're even flirting with the idea of indos already, that means that we are getting to a pretty accelerated point in the injury timeline. Again, the actual timeline here is insane. This is way far ahead of where you would ever have expected Christian Darrisaw to be. I didn't think you would ever see him at camp this year. And so to see him day one is like kind of mind-blowing to me. that doesn't necessarily mean that we're 100% in the clear for him to be ready week 1 or whatever. When injuries, like long-term injuries happen, teams usually come up with some kind of timetable, some kind of schedule, and everybody's injury and body is different. So it could just mean that, hey, some indo work is here because we're past that point, but we still have 2 months left of this. And that would be a totally normal timeline for him to still miss a little bit of time. So we're not out of the woods yet, but it's very, very, very encouraging that you're going to get anything. He also mentioned 2 other injury situations that I've kind of been saying, I like shrugging my shoulders and setting aside. Will Fries, who broke his leg in the middle of the season last year, like week 5, I think, it sounds like basically ready to be back. He will not be put on PUP either. It sounds like he's basically ready to be back, and it's going to be more about onboarding him onto the Vikings. But Kevin O'Connell did imply week 1 full participant Will Fries. So that means in Indo drills, you're going to have all 5. Christian Darrisaw will be there, Will Fries will be there, and the other 3 guys have been healthy from the get-go. So the idea of the healthy week 1 O-line is awesome. The whole offseason, my idea of the O-line has been, boy, on paper, this looks really fun, but are we going to get all 5 of them? And, you know, we're going to have to wait for Christian Darrisaw, and who knows what's up with Will Fries. And by the time those 2 guys are back, is Ryan Kelly going to be hurt and all that stuff? If we get to start with all 5 from the get-go, and we get as many games as possible with those 5 guys, I am not expecting 17. That is kind of impossible. That very rarely happens to anybody, let alone a like pretty famously injury prone line on like a lot of positions. But regardless, as many games as we can get of those 5 is going to be really, really awesome. And the importance of that when you're developing a quarterback and he's young and he's in his first every year, second in the NFL, first playing, that's really exciting. And I don't have to tell you how much it matters to keep that guy upright so that he can, you know, figure out how to learn the protections without having to scramble and run around like crazy. And we're not Justin Fieldsing him, right? But the one that really surprised me the most was Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore's knee, the way that like teams behaved about it in free agency was really concerning. In my experience covering these kind of small time free agent things, which having a daily podcast for like 7 years, you get into every nitty gritty detail in March, right? Which means you're covering a lot of these Latavius Murray kind of situations where some guy who's going to be running back 2 for you ultimately is like visiting with 3 other teams and we're watching it like it's the Favre saga. And that's kind of what happened with Rondale Moore. If you recall, he went to Titans and then he visited the Vikings and he went somewhere else. And then he eventually came back to the Vikings and then signed here. And so when you're going into a lot of facilities as a free agent that has, I think, enough juice to be part of someone's lineup, right? I don't think Rondale Moore is the wide receiver 1 Arizona hoped he was, or even the wide receiver 2 Arizona hoped he was. And he's certainly not the absolute monster that he was at Purdue, but, different game in the NFL, right? But he's still like good enough to be part of a lineup. And so a guy like that comes into your building and you let him go out of that building without a deal. Either he's asking for way too much money, which the contract that he signed, there's no way he was asking for that much money because he signed a contract that was worth like $2 million. I think he was just looking for a place to play. So barring that, it's got to be you didn't like the medicals, right? That was where my mind was. This knee is going to, cut into next year and people are going to be more reticent to sign him because of it. That was the read that I got off of that. But Rondale Moore, not on PUP, ready to contribute. Looking at the wide receiver group this year, most of the questions that I've gotten, most of the discussions that I've had on this show have been about Jalen Naylor and is Ty Felton going to be competing for that job or not? It sounds like not really. With Rondale Moore, if he's really in the mix, really healthy, it's a total wrench in that whole situation. He could absolutely take that wide receiver 3 job. And it'd be really exciting with it. Or he could be souped up Brandon Powell. He's going to take the punt returner job, by the way. That's going to make it harder for someone like Silas Bolden to make the team. Like that puts a huge, gigantic rubber, big red X stamp on some of these undrafted guys who are trying to make the team on only special teams. If Rondale Moore is here and he gets the punt return job, and then he's like wide receiver 4, maybe he's pushing the 3, maybe he takes some snaps. He's a guy that can push Jalen Naylor if he gets the dropsies or whatever. Like that makes this room feel so much deeper and so much more complete. Where like in my head, I don't know if you guys were doing this too. Maybe you weren't. But in my head, Rondale Moore was kind of plucked out of the room and like set off to the side until we got any indication at all that he was like alive and he wasn't just going to be waived injured at the end of camp. This is that indication. Not starting camp on PUP is that indication. I would have bet my house that I don't have a house. I would have bet my, I don't know, dignity, whatever's left of it, that Rondale Moore would have started on PUP, and he didn't. So I'm very surprised pleasantly about that. Very surprised pleasantly about there being an intact O-line to start out camp, and we'll see. You never escape camp without somebody getting hurt too, so we'll see how that all develops as the next few weeks progress. But can't really talk about anything before practices happen, so we'll get into that tomorrow. For now, I would like to talk about the NFL's top 100 players, as discussed by the Locked On Podcast Network. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. If you have been in a Yahoo Fantasy Football League, you might have emails coming in soon because fantasy football is back, and Yahoo Fantasy is the place to set up your league. Whether you're a first-timer or whether you've got a dynasty league that's 10 years deep and you've got like 16 deep bench players and you're looking at high school recruiting prospects, whatever level of degeneracy you are in, Yahoo Fantasy is the place to do it. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over the next 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. And it all begins on August 4th. So stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. Welcome to the NFL's top 100 players. And boy, I'm not happy, okay? So here's how this worked. I'm going to give you a peek under the kimono. I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but I'm going to do this because I'm probably like the last person talking about this. So like whatever, right? The way this worked is, for those of you who don't know, some of you might not know this. So this is a Vikings podcast. There is a version of this podcast for all 32 NFL teams, all of the NBA teams, MLB teams. The network is starting to foray into the WNBA and is still trying to fill out college. So you've got like most of the colleges, or at least all the conferences are represented. You know, there's Locked On Big 12 or Locked On, I almost said Pac-10, rip. But all 32 NFL hosts submitted 10 players. So I picked my top 10 Vikings and submitted my Vikings for that list. And then we all voted on who we thought the top 100 would be. And here are the Minnesota Vikings who made it. You will be very devastated to learn that there are only 3 Vikings. I think they're the right 3 if it's going to be 3. But I think it's insane that there aren't more players. And there are a lot of players here that I would take their Vikings equivalent over that player in a heartbeat. But we'll go over the ones that made it first, and then we'll complain about snubs. At number 90, Jonathan Grenard. That's where we're at, right? Grenard at number 90. I think when we do this exercise next year, and I gotta think we're gonna, he's gonna go up. I think right now he is playing a lot better than his reputation is. I think just kind of being buried on a weird Texans team, and when you talk about the Vikings defense, you talk about the Brian Flores of it all and not necessarily any individual player, which is very Belichickian. And so I think you just don't quite get the PR for those guys that you do for somebody with similar production, but who is a lot more like more visibly the focal point of the defense. But hey, if you're going to have any player on the Vikings defense, to me, it has to be Grenard. The whole thing funnels through Grenard. It is all about getting Grenard a one-on-one. The way that Flores designs his blitzes, and you can tell just by looking at the blitzes, if you get Grenard a one-on-one, that blitz works on the whiteboard. And there's nobody else really on the Vikings that gets that treatment. And there's a reason for that. That is how good Grenard is. That's how important he is to the Vikings. But the other 2, you can probably guess who they are. At number 53, it's Christian Darrisaw. This is maybe too low for him. I think if he continues to play as well as he has, I think you're going to start being able to make the argument that he's the best tackle in the league. Like, I think we are getting to that point with Christian Darrisaw. I was kind of there last year. I don't know. Call me a homer all you want. Maybe I am a homer. I'm not going to be sorry about that. I will not be apologizing. But for like, he's 20 spots below Laramie Tunsil, who Texans fans like wanted to trade at the deadline. I don't know. I think I remember talking about like Wirfs and like Penei Sewell or whatever. But I mean, shoot, we did the top 91 Vikings. We like ranked them all, insane exercise. But when we got to the top, some of us were even arguing about Brian O'Neill as like a top tackle in the whole league. So that, like, there's one snub for you. But I think Christian Darrisaw's impact is very similar to Jonathan Grenard's in that a lot of the protections and a lot of the run schemes are essentially funneled through him. That it is, okay, Darrisaw does this job and can just eliminate a guy, and everybody else works together to like scheme out everything else. And that's just so valuable. Of course, at the top of the list for the Vikings, he's number 6 overall in the top 100, according to the Locked On Podcast Network, is Andrew DePaola, long snapper. I'm just kidding. It's Justin Jefferson over Jamar Chase, which maybe is going to raise some eyebrows. I'm sure Locked On Bengals hated that. That is an argument that I will not be participating in. You guys can have that one. Okay. But it's, you know, the top 5 on this whole list are all QBs. It's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, so QBs you'd expect. And then like Myles Garrett. That's your top 5. Those are your 5 players over Justin Jefferson. I'm not going to sit here and try to argue that Justin Jefferson should be over any of those guys specifically or anything like that. He's the top wide receiver on the thing, and that's kind of what I care about. With these lists, I don't think positional value should matter, but it clearly did in this, because there's no way that the best 4 players in the league all play the same position. No, they're quarterbacks and they get the thing. But I more so care about where you rank like among your position. Like the fact that Jonathan Grenard is below Brian Burns on this list, I disagree with heavily. I saw a lot of Brian Burns last year, and I like him as a power rusher. He's a good player, but I also saw him get like kind of mogged by like a lot of people. So, and get kind of embarrassed in the game against the Vikings. And maybe I'm overreacting to like the one that I saw, but you know, that's the kind of things on this list that like I super care about. For example, Jordan Addison. I think it's time that the season he had last year, it's time that we look at Jordan Addison as the same kind of tier as like Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle, all of whom I think should be on this list over Drake London. Drake London is a fine player for the Atlanta Falcons. I would not trade Jordan Addison for him. And I don't think the Eagles would trade Devonta Smith for him, and I don't think the Dolphins would trade Jalen Waddle for him. I think he's fine, but there's always been limitations to his play that prevent him from having that Jamar Chase-like impact on his team. And he's a wide receiver 1 in Atlanta right now. But you know, guys like that, I think TJ Hawkinson should absolutely be on this list. The fact that you have George Kittle and Travis Kelce both well past their primes over TJ Hawkinson, it feels to me a little bit like fantasy football exposure. You know, you got Trey McBride on here. You got guys that kind of got hype as fantasy targets, but aren't necessarily as important to their offenses. Like George Kittle is not as important to his offense as he used to be. TJ Hawkinson still very much is. And I think there's just a sort of Vikings exposure thing. When you ask anybody who doesn't cover Minnesota about the Vikings, or maybe like, let me be perfectly honest about my perspective here. My perspective is very much informed. Like my idea of what the national media thinks is informed by some stuff that I see from NFL.com, you know, Heed the Call, you know, the national stuff that I consume, and also the conversations that I see on Locked On NFL, of course, which you can find me there Wednesday mornings, by the way, plug. But a lot of it comes from the questions I get asked when I go on shows that are not central to the Vikings, but they want to know about the Vikings, whether they are national shows, you know, radio hits or whatever, or sometimes it'll be, hey, this is some New Orleans radio show, and we're going through every team that, you know, that the Saints are going to play this year, and here's the Vikings. Sometimes I'll be part of that kind of stuff, or just around the league kind of stuff, you know, other NFC North teams and their shows. And the questions never have anything to do with anybody on the roster but JJ McCarthy. So I think that the Vikings are in this shadow right now that nobody can really, like, I think a lot of people probably can't name 4 Vikings, even though there's a whole bunch of Pro Bowl caliber players. and players who have made Pro Bowls that you still like maybe won't think of as Vikings. And only until you like pull up the roster and you go, oh, this is like a sneaky star-studded roster. Yeah, man, it's stacked as heck. that was kind of the whole point of the JJ McCarthy and the competitive rebuild and all that stuff. And you didn't notice because they were never really the most extreme team at doing any of this crap. And they were always kind of in it a little bit. And you would sort of assume that a roster would like decay, but it's been like turning over a ton, like sneaky. So I think they're like enshrouded in a little bit of shadow, and it makes you forget about guys like TJ Hawkinson and Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman, who I think deserves to be mentioned among the top 10, 15 linebackers, probably not on this list, but deserves to be mentioned among some of the top linebackers in the league. I think guys like, again, Hawkinson, Addison, Brian O'Neill, you can be really excited about a lot of these players, even though they're not getting the national recognition, because the way I think about it, they're just not getting the national recognition yet. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.